Hello students and welcome to your second video on conservation. This one is all about the ethics of agriculture. So as humans, we know our population is really large and there's lots of things that we do that impact our environment. But one thing that isn't going to go away and does have a really large impact on our planet is agriculture. And so by the end of this video, we should be able to discuss some of the ecological implications of some of the methods that we use to grow and raise food. So I'm going to start out by looking at just a couple of graphs that talk about some of the impacts humans are having on the planet. These ones all have to do with biodiversity. So down here at the bottom, we see that as the number of humans increases, the number of other species on the planet is decreasing. Here we see that there's lots of different things that are decreasing biodiversity as we go forward in time. But this image right here is the one I want to look at right now. So this one lists some different things that humans do and then how they impact the planet. And if we look at agriculture, it is going to change habitat of other species. It is going to increase pollution. Additions means it's going to add other species to areas, and it is going to impact climate change. So of all the different things that humans do, one of the things that has the largest impact is agriculture. So what I would like to do in the next section is just talk a little bit about some different ways that food is raised and some different methods that are used to create our food. There are so many different methods. I just chose a couple that I want to talk about. As we go forward, there's this quote that I just want you to keep in the back of your mind. So this quote is, "The single greatest lesson the garden teaches is that our relationship to the planet need not be zero-sum, and that as long as the sun still shines and people can still plan and plant, think and do, we can, if we bother to try, find ways to provide for ourselves without diminishing the world." The reason I want to start with this quote is, first of all, Michael Pollan is a really famous author who writes a lot about food stuff. But he, in this quote, is really positive. So often it's really easy to get very doomsday about all the stuff that we're doing to our planet, and that's not helpful. If we just accept all these things that are going poorly and just take them in as something that's going to happen, then we're not going to improve our planet to a point that is still around for the future. And so we need to keep a positive outlook on the world, that we can find ways to provide for ourselves without hurting the planet. Okay, so with that, I want to talk about just a couple of different methods that are used often in agriculture and to create our food. So the first one we want to talk about is a method called slash and burn. So in this method, you take an area of forest or vegetation, basically burn it, and then clear that area and use that land for farming. So slash and burn farming has been done for millennia. It's been done for a really, really long period of time, but it's recently had a lot of publicity because it's used very often in the rainforest. And a lot of deforestation that we see in large parts of the rainforest is using slash and burn methodology. So when you're doing slash and burn agriculture, there's always some advantages and there's some disadvantages. For every different type of agriculture I talk about here, I'm going to talk about some advantages and disadvantages because there always are both. All of these conservation ideas are really riddled with ethical issues. And so you need to become an informed citizen who can make your own decisions about these sorts of things. So slash and burn farming does have some advantages in that it allows for removal of non-agricultural species to reduce competition. So when we are growing food, it definitely is a benefit if there aren't other species that are trying to take up food land. And so slash and burn allows for that. Also, slash and burn might disrupt the soil less than other methods of clearing land. So other things that can happen is you can cut down all the trees and you can drag them away. And as you drag those trees away, that can impact the soil. Another thing people do to clear the land is chop down all the trees and then put them through like a mulcher and turn them into little pieces of wood. And that can also impact the soil more than just burning. And so compared to some other methods, slash and burn can disrupt the soil less. However, there are some disadvantages to it. First of all, and this is a big deal in the rainforest, is that it increases erosion. So erosion is when parts of the soil are washed away. Slash and burn is going to burn out the roots, and a lot of roots hold things together, hold the soil together, and so it can increase erosion in that way. One of the biggest issues with slash and burn is that the first time that's done, there's still a lot of nutrients that are held in that soil, but eventually it's going to decline in productivity. So as those soil nutrients get used up by the agricultural plants, and as weeds come in and pests come in, then that same area has become less and less and less useful for agriculture. And so most often with slash and burn, you slash and burn an area, use it really extensively for a couple of years, and then that soil is not good anymore for agricultural use, and so that area is left alone and another area has to be burned. When things are burned, air pollution can be increased as well. So a couple advantages and disadvantages to this method of farming. Another method I want to talk about is the idea of monocrop farming. And a lot of these methods overlap in that they're used simultaneously. Monocropping is something that's done a whole lot in large scale farming. So the idea of it is that you grow just a single crop year after year on the same land. We see this a lot if you've ever driven through like Nebraska, all you see is corn for a really, really long period of time. That's monocropping. Instead of growing a lot of different species together, you're just growing one species. We can see that here where we see all of these rows of the exact same species being grown. In the United States, corn, soybeans, and wheat are the three crops that we grow the most of, and all three of them are done pretty extensively using monocrop techniques. So monocrop farming, again, has some advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages is that it's easier for farmers. So if you can specialize in one crop, then farmers only need the tools and the chemicals that are used for that particular crop. And that can allow us to maximize profits because it becomes more and more efficient to do that sort of farming. If crops are really uniform, they're much easier to process. So if everything is the same size and it's in really straight, nice, neat little rows, it's really easy to use tools to go through and get the food off the plant, or to separate the wheat from the rest of the plant, or to separate out the corn. So it definitely is much easier in that way. That makes it initially cheaper for us. So one of the big issues with food is we want it to be delicious, and we want it to be cheap, and we want it to be nutritious. Cheapness, oftentimes in monocrop farming, is increased. Things become less expensive. And then if there's a crop that we use a whole lot of, you can plant it in a really large area. So things like corn and wheat and soy, we can cover large areas with those, so we have enough of that particular type of crop to meet demand. However, even though monocrop farming is done a lot, there are some disadvantages to it. For example, if you plant just one type of plant in an area, that plant is going to use up all the nutrients that it uses a lot of, and none of those nutrients can be replaced. So different species of agricultural plants are good at using different types of nutrients. And if you are able to mix up the plants that are grown in an area, the nutrients can be depleted less quickly than they are with monocropping. Because those nutrients are depleted so quickly, you have to use chemical fertilizers. So if your plants use up all the nitrogen, for example, you have to put nitrogen onto those plants. And that can cause a whole lot of pollution because those chemical fertilizers can run off and get into water, or those chemical fertilizers can run off and get into other areas that they're not supposed to be. Another issue with monocrops is that pests and diseases can really easily spread. So often in a monocrop, all the different species or all the different individuals that are grown are really genetically similar, if not identical. So if you find a type of wheat that's really good, then you're going to grow that exact same type of wheat, which can be a good thing, except for the fact that if there's a pest that is able to eat that type of wheat, it can just spread in an area really quickly. Because diseases and pests can go in this area so quickly, that also increases the need for the use of chemicals. Because if you're able to use those chemicals to get rid of those pests, then those plants can still grow. That reduces genetic diversity. So again, if you have individuals that are really good, you're going to grow more of those and not of others. This means if one crop or one individual does fail, like if the diseases take over or if there's not enough nutrients, the farmer is left with nothing, and that can be kind of dangerous for the farmers. Also, monocropping just by definition reduces biodiversity to near zero. So you clear all the different types of species and you clear all the evenness from an area and you just put in one species. So this really reduces biodiversity, and a lot of the wildlife that could potentially live in agricultural land is also reduced. Let's talk a little bit about this quote because I also like it. So this is again by Michael Pollan, that same guy who writes a lot about food. So he says, in the wild, a plant and its pests are continually co-evolving in a dance of resistance and conquest that can have no ultimate victor. But coevolution ceases in an orchard of grafted trees. So grafted trees are trees that are all the same sort of idea with monocropping, since they are genetically identical from generation to generation. The problem, very simply, is that the apple trees no longer reproduce sexually, as they do when they're grown from seed, and sex is nature's way of creating fresh genetic combinations. At the same time, the viruses, bacteria, fungi, and insects keep very much at it, reproducing sexually and continuing to evolve until eventually they hit on the precise genetic combination that allows them to overcome whatever resistance the apples may have once possessed. Suddenly, total victory is in the pest sight, unless, that is, people come to the tree's rescue, wielding the tools of modern chemistry. So this comes from a discussion of a monocrop apple orchard, but the same idea applies to any sort of monocrop. I want to talk a little bit about this example monocrop. These are some pictures that I took when I was in Costa Rica this summer. They grow a lot of pineapples there, and pineapples are so delicious and I love them, but they're one of the more dangerous monocrops. You can see this guy right here is putting black plastic over the ground. That's to keep any other species from growing. Instead, only this pineapple is able to grow. You can see this really reduces biodiversity in an area like Costa Rica, which is known for being incredibly biodiverse. Monocropping and slash and burn, those are both issues that can increase a lot in the tropical rainforest area. And there's a lot of arguments specifically for preserving the rainforest. For example, there's ecological reasons. In the rainforest, native species are adapted to local conditions, where invasive species are less likely to be in balance. Species in the rainforest are interdependent, so loss of species threatens the rest of the community. Deforestation of rainforests increases soil erosion, increases silting of rivers, which is where soil gets in there, increases flooding, and increases carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There's also a lot of economic reasons for preserving the rainforest. Ecotourism, that's sort of what I did this summer, where we go around, I looked at a bunch of places, and I spent money while I was doing it. That was good for the people who lived in the area. There's also aesthetic reasons, where things are just pretty. When we are reducing diversity, we have loss of beauty of the system. There's all these artists that are just inspired by everything that happens in the rainforest. So that's not something that we can ignore when we're thinking about why we want to preserve the rainforest. There's also ethical reasons, and I think these are big ones. There's some people who think that every species has a right to life, regardless of what it's used for us humans. And this one right here, potential of undiscovered medicines, that's a big deal, especially in the rainforest where the majority of species are not known. There's all these species that could potentially really help humans, but we haven't discovered that yet. And if they go extinct before we can discover it, that's no good for us. If we're able to respect the existing balance with peoples who live there in the rainforest, we may be able to use the rainforest a little bit better. And the final reason for preserving the rainforest is a cultural reason. It preserves a lot of human cultural diversity. A lot of the people who live in the rainforest have very unique identities.